Yep, another week, another controversy. In case you don't know, Pink News put out an article about Jagex's CEO deciding to cancel Pride celebrations, and today I want to talk exactly about that. I want to mostly go over the articles and some of the things that were said in the articles, and also go over some of the arguments I hear all the time and explain why, to me, this decision doesn't make a lot of sense, and that's why it's kind of important to push back on it. I apologize for no editing in this video, since I was actually working on another video for today, and I really only had time to write the script, and I wasn't even gonna make this video, but I was like, I think it's important, I'm gonna make it. So yeah. Also, the link for the article will be in the description. So, apparently, on the 25th of April, Jagex's CEO, John Bellamy, which is actually a very fitting name if you know One Piece, posted a message on the internal boards of the company about cancelling Pride for both games, so devs could instead focus on what players wanted. Let's ignore for a moment that a lot of players actually wanted Pride, so much so that, in fact, the first week of nothing being announced, a bunch of people in the community got together to make an event, which will actually happen later this month, and I'll leave a link in the description as well with more information on that. Now, that aside, this generated a pushback from staff, and apparently, according to Mod Other on Blue Sky, the event for Old School RuneScape was already designed, the rewards were in the process of being finished, so there was already a lot of work put into the event, and this is where my first problem comes in. Look, I think that overall, the player base hates wasted dev time. Which is then truly bizarre that, knowing this, you decided to essentially just look at content that already had plenty of dev time invested and canned it anyway, meaning that you did exactly the thing that players hate, aka wasting dev time. The CEO would later respond to the backlash of the staff, and I will actually be going over some of the, I guess, little bit of statements that he made, but the result from the staff pushing back is that RuneScape 3 will have the Pride event, which is gonna be a repeat of last year's event with no new content, and Old School RuneScape was allowed to have the Marsh that happens every year, that I think already happened, although from what I know that was kind of done on developers' free time, not on developers' company time, so, you know, bodes well. This is actually also another caveat to the situation. While we can sit here and say that this is a waste of dev time, many developers actually offered to work on the event on their own free time. So look, if a developer is offering to do shit without compensation, it's because they really give a fuck about the thing they are actually making. And yet the CEO declined. I don't think devs should actually be working for free, by the way, but this is, you know, once again showing that if it weren't for the developers, Jagex would have gone under a long time ago. Amidst the layoffs, project scenarios being canned, membership price increases, lack of player support, and aggressive microtransactions, Jagex management remains by far the worst thing Jagex has ever fucking put into the world, and they released RuneScape Chronicles. It's a tale as old as time, the staff versus management, the people who are in touch with the game and the community versus the people who see the game only for its numbers. I already touched a lot on this, so I won't go over it again, but it does suck that we have had so many developers laid off, especially veteran ones, and apparently more than we actually even knew before. But yes, before I actually get into his statement, I do want to highlight that the reason why he decided to cancel Pride was because of the current political climate, supposedly in America. He didn't mention in America, but, you know, I mean, what the fuck would it be on? And the choice to cancel the Pride celebrations was to avoid potential backlash. First of all, who gives a fuck about America? Okay, obviously I'm being a little bit hyperbolic here, you know, obviously I do give a shit, but since we are making like a decision to cancel Pride for everyone, why are we, like, since when are we actually making this decision for a game that will affect the entire game based on a single country's political climate? Like, are we going to cancel Christmas because some Muslim countries don't like it and some RuneScape players are Muslim? Like, it's just incredibly stupid on a level that I didn't even think was possible, honestly. And I think the worst part is people are always going on about how Pride is, you know, very political and we don't want politics in our video game, and then the fucking CEO pulls this shit. right? In terms of avoiding backlash, however, well, people decided to gather in Falador to riot. Reddit is completely in flames over this, even with the brigading, posts being, outraged that these are actually getting plenty of traction, and people feel incredibly pissed off. So, congratulations on avoiding potential backlash from people who didn't even play the game, just so you could guarantee backlash from people who do. Fun fact, the background footage you are seeing is from said riot that I spent like 2 hours there, but it went on for a few hours at least. Now, when it comes to his statement, he first makes it clear that it was his decision, then he claims studios and games are being cancelled for being woke, which is simply not true. Looking at player numbers for both versions of RuneScape, both RuneScape 3 and Old School RuneScape, Pride events simply do not represent a concrete amount of loss in players or loss in revenue, and that is also not happening in other games. So not only did he solely make that decision himself, he made it based on a falsehood, a fear of something that isn't even happening, much less to RuneScape. Then he goes on to say that the game is supposed to be a safe haven, and that his decision is to keep us from harm, and that is a direct quote, the keep us from harm, by, removing the safe haven for people that are currently being targeted, which is just very solid logic. You want to keep people from harm by removing things that they need. Obviously, the keep us from harm is keeping the company profit from harm, not the fucking players. He then says that the content is now controversial in a way that didn't used to be. So I actually want to take this time to make a short summary of Pride in RuneScape, because I do think it's important to give a little bit of context on that, because apparently a lot of players don't seem to know. First up, the first Pride thing we've ever had in RuneScape were the parades. They were organized mainly by queer people and queer clans. They faced a lot of hate and bigotry, and over the years some developers and JMods took interest in also participating in them, and would also attend them and would try and at least ban whatever bigots they could, and that over the years grew bigger and bigger. The interest got higher and higher, and essentially it escalated all the way into the past few years, the parades actually being coordinated to also be I guess in a way sponsored by Jagex. Not necessarily sponsored, but essentially being actually shouted out by the actual accounts, and JMods actually participating to try and monitor it and everything. Pretty much those are, that's I guess the progression of the parades themselves. The most important part of Pride, however, was in 2017. There was a mod called Mod Wolf, which pushed and created, he worked on this on his free time, the first Pride event for Old School RuneScape. This event consisted of 7 rainbows around the free-to-play area, and you had to collect fragments to give to a leprechaun to get a scarf, which is not a scarf, it's a fucking tie with a little, it's a rainbow tie with a little art, but it's a tie, it's not a scarf, alright, let's get the shit straight. Now, not a single bit of dialogue actually involved anything related to queerness. Obviously, don't get me wrong, it was clearly queer-coded, but the event merely talked about, finding yourself and exploring yourself, being true to yourself without fear, and, just being unapologetically. Basically, look, it sounded like a lot of platitudes because it was a lot of platitudes, and that was kind of the point. The point was for Mod Wolf to, sort of make an event that could reflect queerness, but an event that could apply to everyone, even those people that weren't queer. Mod Wolf got heavily harassed over that. To make matters worse, besides the riots that happened in Falador, players got so outraged that they decided to dress up in desert robes, went after players with dark skin color, and proceeded to roleplay about lynching said players. Yes, this is a thing that happened. Players thought that the best way to show outrage over a Pride event was to pretend to be the KKK and roleplay at lynching black people. I have no fucking words as to why the fuck this was even a thing. Obviously, they were all perma-banned because of course they fucking were. They were all playing at fucking being the KKK lynching black people. That has absolutely no fucking space in RuneScape, but that should tell you the type of people that the, anti-pride, anti-woke attracts, right? So, yeah, I'm sorry, it's way too much. And ultimately, that's the thing. I don't think things right now are actually more controversial than they were before. If anything, nowadays Pride is only controversial because it's a grifter topic, whereas 8 years ago, people were role-playing as the KKK. To fucking remind you of that. That happened. To make matters worse, however, according to an interview that Mod Sean, or I guess ex-J Mod Sean, because nowadays he's on Call of Duty, I think, had with Matt K, or I guess ex-J Mod Matt K, because he also is not a J Mod anymore, but he was a prominent old-school RuneScape J Mod. Very few people actually opposed the Pride event. Most players rioting and, being hateful and role-playing as a fucking KKK were actually players that simply didn't play the game, or were people that were brigading from outside of the game, like places like 4chan. This is reflected even more strongly in the next years, where despite people complaining about these events on places like Twitter and Reddit, as a whole, most people just didn't care, while those who cared about the events simply took part in them and enjoyed them. So no, this does not bring more risk to the company or the game than it did before. Yet again, we have a CEO that is caving in because he doesn't want risk in general over a thing that didn't even have that much risk to begin with. I would think it's important for a CEO to know his stuff when it comes to management, but given the track record of the CEO ever since he got into power like a few months ago, I'm going to assume he doesn't actually know that much about the game or how it works, especially not when it comes to its community. After this, Jagex staff pretty much just sent a letter to the executive team, pleading to, keep working on the events, especially, again, considering that a lot of work had already been done to simply go to waste, and the developers really, wanted it, which is why some developers were like, hey, I'll even do this on my free time, I just want this to go ahead. Honestly, the executive team's response was somehow fucking worse than the CEO's, which I didn't think it was possible. So, in part of the response, they state that, and I am quoting this, right? This is a quote from the article that apparently it's a quote from the fucking response they gave. Our job isn't to use the game as an outlet for our own views. Yet, the entire fucking reason why the events are being cancelled is because the CEO simply decided it would be that way. The views of the devs were never fucking considered, the views of the players don't seem to fucking matter, the only view that actually matter is the CEO's. If your job isn't to use the game as an outlet for your views, why is the CEO able to fucking do his? Why is the CEO able to enact his views on the game against the views of everyone else if your objective or your job isn't to use the game as an outlet for your views? Not to mention, this is just straight up an idiotic statement. Simply put, the human experience, believe it or not, is inherently intertwined with being human. I know, very fucking shocking, right? Who knew that being human just was intertwined with the human experience? I understand you probably didn't know that, but I think it's, a very shocking statement. As such, it is pretty much fucking impossible to create anything that doesn't have our views. Regardless if you want to believe art is political or not, which it very much is, art is, above everything, human. And humans are subjective, they're flawed, and they're diverse. But management would actually never fucking say this if we were talking about any other topic at all, especially one where it was more profit-oriented. They also the article reached to a Jagex spokesperson for comment. I was gonna go over it, but the reality is it was a nothing burger. It's just like, it's pretty much the case of PR branches of companies. You say a lot of words without actually saying anything because you don't want to get in trouble. Now, with that out of the way, I do actually want to go over perhaps some very common comments, I guess, I tend to see, not just now, but I've been seeing for the past couple of years of being on the internet and, being queer. I think it's important to at least like talk about them or address them, as I think it's easy to think they are very logical, when in reality, I think having details really matters and changes a lot of the context of a lot of those comments. So, first of all, the most common type of comment that I actually see are variations of, well, the company never gave a shit about pride. And yeah, this is true. However, two very important things to understand here. One, rainbow capitalism is bad, but it's still better than complete disregard for queer people. And two, this wasn't the company's idea. Pride was both born from the community and Mod Wolf, as I stated above, and later on carried by the many devs at the company that give a shit about Pride or are part of the community themselves. If it was down to Jagex, Pride events wouldn't even have happened in the first place, but the devs made an effort to make it happen. So as much as the companies, and in this case Jagex, doesn't care about Pride or you, the developers, the humans that work on the game, do give a shit. And that's an important distinction to be made here. Companies are very risk averse, which is why some either only do very minimal stuff for Pride or don't do stuff at all, even when it was, becoming popular to do things for Pride. And honestly, this is Jagex trying to be risk averse by appealing to the anti-woke climate to avoid backlash, and, hilariously getting backlash anyway for being fucking dumb. The other most common thing that I usually see is, I have nothing against queer people, I just don't want politics in my video game. Aside from the fact that it was the CEO who literally made this political, I know this might sound crazy, but queer people also want an escape from real life. In fact, RuneScape was sometimes the only safe space some queer people had to explore themselves and be themselves. Saying that you want to escape the hardships of reality and just enjoy a game, and that's why we shouldn't have queer stuff, is honestly just a dog whistle that means you have no empathy to spare, thinking about the fact that not only do other people also want an escape from real life, but also the fact they might need that escape more than you need it. Besides, if you do consider, say, gender is political, right? Then Jagex should just remove genders altogether. But they did that with body type A and body type B, and guess what? People got fucking upset over it. So essentially, you don't want politics in the video game, but you have no consistency in your logic and consider everything you don't like political to try and censor it from video games. If gender is political, if no gender is political, then the only non-political thing is already your worldview. Sounds to me like you are simply afraid of interacting with diverse people, and instead of working on yourself, you try and eliminate anyone who you don't understand. This is harmful and is exactly how hateful ideologies spread. Relating to the first type of comment that I mentioned, I also see the claim that like the reason as to why Jagex or companies are pivoting away from Pride is because it's no longer profitable to do so. This is, again, as I mentioned above, untrue. Pride events don't tend to significantly impact the player retention or the revenue in the game, both positively or negatively. They're not a risk and they're not like a huge thing. Both games have held a steady player base over the recent years. Another thing that I also see often is, well, what about XYZ celebration? Like, for example, like now it's mental health awareness or Men's Mental Health Awareness Month or something like that. As I've mentioned above, the only reason why Pride has events is because the community organized and pushed for them. If you feel like this is really important, well, organize it and push for it. But let's be honest, most people that make this argument don't actually care about others, they are only trying to have a gotcha moment. If they did care about others, they wouldn't be complaining about Pride. Also, alongside this, usually the other argument is that, well, if you celebrate one thing, you need to celebrate everything or you're an hypocrite. Again, no, not really, as it is, heavily dependent on what people organize and push for and what devs want to work on. But again, if you do think there is an event that should be made into the game, or at least that Jagex should recognize, organize it and do stuff for it. Regardless of Pride event being in the game or not, again, some people in the community are organizing one right now. Another thing is that I see is, as a queer person, I don't want to be celebrated, just treated normally. You probably have heard something like this or very similar to this. The thing is, Pride isn't about celebrating queer people as much as it is a statement that we exist and deserve to be treated as normal people. The existence of Pride and the spectacle of queer people being themselves is normalizing queerness. I know it's tempting to fall into the trap of being one of the good ones, which usually means, being a queer person that parrots cishet talking points, but the reality of those talking points is that they are an attempt to erase queer people. Let's do a quick exercise to try and understand this. When was the last time a queer person won, say, an award and didn't get any hate? I don't remember one. Just a few days ago, a non-binary person won a Tony Award for the Best Actor, and the internet responded by making fun of them. When was the last time you saw someone online or in-game express disgust towards queer people? Well, I mean, that would be in this exact video before I actually ignored the people saying hateful things. If these things are happening, even with Pride and queer people being open, what do you think the response was going to be if we didn't have Pride, or we were not open about this? Do you think people would be more accepting or less? People tend to find disgust in things that they don't understand, in things that are unfamiliar to them. So having less exposure to it than now would actually make their disgust stronger. The less you talk about something, the easier it is for not only for you to be disgusted towards it, but also to be really hateful towards it and want to erase it. It isn't random that when you want to control something or someone or a topic, you censor people and anyone who has lived in a fascist country, which, let's be fucking honest, is most of Europe, right? Most Europeans have fucking history of fascism in their countries. If you have a country that has a fascist history, you probably know how harmful censorship can be and how good of a tool censorship is to erase people's identities, to erase ideas, and to just sow control and so pretty much just the lack of people being able to live. For comparison, or for a little bit of a context, I live in Portugal. We pretty much lived in dictatorship for 46 years, where censorship was really bad. We have toppled that dictatorship for 51 years now. It fell in 1974, which honestly wasn't that long ago, and I still hear people, say things and relate to things without using words. For example, people don't say that, people would criticize the government would be killed or would be jailed. People would just say that they would disappear, because if you implied that the government was killing people or jailing people that were critical of them, you would go to jail yourself. Censorship works by wanting to control you, and oftentimes you just can't even say the things that are just true, things that are accurate, because you can't. Censorship is a very powerful tool, and people that are trying to erase you, that are trying to erase your ideas, and in this case erasing the idea that the government is harmful and it's killing or jailing people, is to not allow people to say those things. So you slowly erase the idea in people's minds that that is exactly what was happening. So in a lot of people's minds, that never happened. What happened was that people would indeed disappear, right? Censorship is very strong to erase ideas and erase just actions as a whole, to erase the truth. So yeah, look, Pride and queer people living their lives openly while discussing them is normalizing queer people. So Pride existing and Pride events existing and people just participating in them, that is normalizing queer people. Another quote that I tend to hear quite a bit is, I don't mind Pride updates, I just don't want them shoved down my throat. I actually love this argument because it sounds hella gay, I'm gonna be honest. Why are you bringing up things being shoved down your throat? I mean, look, I'm not judging, I'm just curious, In any case, this is pretty much the same case as not wanting politics in your video game. It's a thinly veiled attempt at seeming reasonable when in reality you simply don't want to interact with anything that your worldview doesn't already understand. Of course, that if you don't tend to understand queer people, any minor inclusion of them in games, in this case, will inevitably jump at you, which you are going to take as a personal attack. You know what helps with that? Interacting with queerness. You'll very quickly realize how little queerness actually shows up in media. And lastly, and to sort of readdress the, well, this is a waste of dev time. Well, you know, technically every update is a waste of dev time. As humans, we decide what we value and what, you know, in this case goes for the dev time. Some people perceive entire skills as a waste of dev time, while others love those skills and appreciate the dev time that was put into them. What we choose to focus on and prioritize in terms of dev time isn't an objective truth. It's decided by the whims of the community. If the community wants mostly PVM updates, then we get PVM updates as a priority. I don't do PVMs, so as a result, I think that PVM updates are a waste of time. But what about people that love PVMing? For, you know, just as a note, I don't actually think PVM updates are a waste of time. I tend to look at the game from an holistic perspective where different parts of it matter, but what if I did? You know, even if I did think that PVM updates were a waste of time, some people love PVMing and they don't find it a waste of time. They find it to be the right thing to do and the right way to focus their time. We develop a bunch of other seasonal events, for example, that some players love, while others find it a waste of their time. This is yet again a cop-out to try and make an unreasonable argument sound reasonable. I'm not saying I'm against Pride, I'm concerned over dev time. Yeah, well, you know, cancelling Pride and removing stuff relating to it actually costs more dev time than just doing the fucking events. But I don't see dev time purists advocate for Pride events to keep going as a result. I think that, as a whole, and to sort of close out the video, I think it's important to rationalize things. I understand that a lot of these things might sound emotional, but when you put details, the pieces in place, you come to realize that actually a lot of these things are just logical, and that trying to understand how everything fits together and how things work is actually the rational thing to do. There's a lot of projection that is done from bigots to try and deflect from their emotional feelings. Not that being emotional is wrong, or that having feelings is wrong, it's actually very normal, but trying to disguise them instead of working through them is extremely harmful, not just for other people around you, but for yourself as well. You're emotionally stunting yourself by trying to not be emotional, or at least letting your emotions be considered as not emotional rather than just working through your emotions. You can rationalize your emotions and it doesn't make them less of emotions or doesn't make them less important. And it's honestly a very important thing to do. This is why a lot of bigots actually tend to deflect arguments like, no, I'm not offended over continuously raging over a broad and vague topic like wokeness ruining video games. You are the one that is offended because you made a critique to my rage or something along those lines, right? If you let your emotions take a hold of you rather than rationalizing those emotions and understanding that sometimes they're okay, but you have to understand where they come from. As a queer person, this can actually be really exhausting to deal with, you know? Always seeing this type of people and this type of projection and deflection, it gets really exhausting, which is also why I would appeal to allies and queer people to sometimes let the ragers rage. Energy isn't infinite and eventually they'll calm down. Take care of yourself and don't waste your time and energy, and on top of that ruin your mood because of them. Of course that it's important to call them out and it's important to push back against harmful ideas, but it's also important to be happy and live your life, focusing on yourself. As with everything, moderation is key, so please take care of yourself.